Have you ever found yourself grieving something that didn't actually die? Maybe you retired after decades of work, maybe your children left home, maybe you sold the family house, closed a business, changed careers, or finally walked away from a relationship you knew had run its course. Now, from the outside, people might congratulate you. Congratulations on your retirement. Congratulations on your new job. Congratulations on your next chapter. But inside, your emotions tell a much more complicated story. There's excitement, but there's also sadness. There's hope, but there's also fear. There's relief, but there's also uncertainty. And if you've ever caught yourself wondering, why do I feel this way when it's exactly what I wanted? Well, you're not alone. In fact, what you may be experiencing isn't a sign that something's wrong. It may be a sign that something mattered. And today we're going to explore why letting go is often one of the hardest parts of personal growth, why grief and uncertainty are natural parts of change, and how learning to work with your emotions instead of fighting against them can help you more confidently in your next chapter. Welcome to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, where we explore the keys to unlocking your full potential and living your best life. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. Whether you're looking to make a breakthrough, overcome a challenge, or simply live with greater clarity, joy, and purpose, you'll find the tools and inspirations you need right here. So let's start your journey towards personal mastery and growth right now. Welcome back to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, your go-to resource for practical tips, insightful research, and inspiring stories to help you unlock your full potential. I'm your host, Jose Johnson, and I'm an expert in the fields of mindfulness, mindset, and peak performance, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. Now, over the past several episodes, we've explored the stories that we tell ourselves, our emotional environment, how our thinking becomes biased, why attention is one of the most valuable resources, how action creates momentum, and most recently, why alignment matters more than balance. But all of these conversations naturally lead us to another very important question. What happens when life asks us to let go? Because no matter how intentional we become, change is inevitable. And every new chapter asks us to leave something behind. Today, we are going to explore why transitions can feel so emotionally overwhelming, what neuroscience teaches us about uncertainty, how to separate facts from the stories we tell ourselves, and practical ways to move forward without losing sight of who we really are. So let's dive in. All right, so this week's episode was inspired by one of my coaching clients. Recently, they made the difficult decision to close a successful business that they had owned and operated for more than 20 years. And now they're preparing to sell the building where that business lived. And as we talked, they admitted something many people feel, but few people say out loud. They were scared. Not because they thought that they made the wrong decision, but because they didn't know exactly what came next. And honestly, who among us hasn't felt that way? Whether you're retiring, changing careers, ending a relationship, sending your kids off to college, or simply entering a new season of life, transition can feel uncomfortable. Now, as we talked, I told them something that surprised them. I said, I'm really not worried that you're feeling this way. In fact, I'd be more concerned if you weren't. Now, think about that for a minute. If you spent 20 years building something meaningful, wouldn't it be strange if walking away didn't affect you? Now, those emotions don't necessarily mean that you made the wrong decision. They often mean that you're leaving behind something that mattered. The depth of our emotions often reflects the depth of our investment. So why does letting go feel so difficult, even when we're moving towards something better? Part of the answer lies inside one of the most remarkable organs in the human body, your brain. So why does letting go feel so difficult, even when you're moving towards something better? Well, part of the answer lies in understanding how your brain works. One of the primary jobs of your brain is to keep you alive. And one of the ways it does that is by constantly making predictions about what's going to happen next. Just think about your morning routine. You probably wake up around the same time, you brush your teeth, you make your coffee, you drive to work the same way. Your brain loves routines because routines are predictable, and predictable feels safe. In fact, neuroscientists often describe the brain as a prediction machine. Every day, it's comparing what it expects to happen with what actually happens. Now, when the two match, everything's running smoothly. But when life suddenly changes, the prediction no longer matches reality. The routines disappear. The familiar environment changes. The future becomes uncertain. And your brain responds by paying much closer attention. Now, that's why major life transitions can feel mentally exhausting. You're not just making decisions about the future. Your brain is actually rewriting the map it's relied on for years. So think about my client. For more than 20 years, they knew exactly what tomorrow looked like. They knew where they'd be, who they would see, what problems they'd solve, what their role was. Then, almost overnight, that map disappeared. No wonder they felt uncertain. The same thing happened to me years ago when I made the decision to close my martial arts school. Now, from the outside, it looked like a career change, but internally, it was much bigger than that. For years, people knew me as Jose the martial arts instructor, and I knew myself that way too. My daily routine revolved around teaching classes, mentoring students, preparing lessons, and running a school. When I closed that chapter and began building the business I have today, I wasn't just learning a new profession. I was learning a new version of myself. And looking back, I can see that what I was experiencing wasn't failure. It wasn't regret. It wasn't a lack of confidence. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty has a way of making even the strongest among us feel uncomfortable. But here's the encouraging part. Your brain is remarkably adaptive. One of the greatest discoveries in modern neuroscience is something called neuroplasticity, your brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself by creating new neural connections throughout your life. In other words, the same brain that feels unsettled today is capable of adapting tomorrow. The unfamiliar eventually becomes familiar. The uncertain eventually becomes routine. And what feels impossible today may someday feel as natural as the life you're leaving behind. Look, the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty. The goal is to trust yourself while you're learning to navigate it. But the thing is, our brains aren't the only thing that makes change difficult. Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't what happened. It's in the meaning we attach to what happened. And that's where many of us unknowingly create suffering that doesn't have to exist. So let's talk about that next. One of the biggest challenges during any major life transition is that we often confuse what happened with what it means. Right? So let me explain. When something significant changes in our lives, there are actually two things happening at the same time. First, there are the facts. Then there's the story we tell ourselves about those facts. And those two things can be very, very different. So, for example, the fact might be that your business closed. The story might become, I'm a failure. The fact is that your marriage ended. The story can become, I'm not lovable. The fact is that you retired. The story becomes, I don't matter anymore. The fact is that your children moved out. The story becomes, I've lost my purpose. Now, do you see what happened? The event quietly became your identity. You see, facts describe experience. Stories define people. And those two are not the same thing. Now, one of the most important things I shared with my client was this. Closing a business because it failed, well, it doesn't make you a failure. Ending a relationship doesn't make you unlovable. And changing careers doesn't erase your gifts, your wisdom, or your value. Now, see, the event is real, but the identity story, well, that is optional. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore reality. It doesn't mean we pretend everything's okay. It simply means we refuse to allow one chapter of our lives to become the title of the entire book. Now, I experienced this myself when I closed my martial arts school. For a while, I caught myself asking a question that many people ask during times of transition: who am I now? But eventually, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. The better question was, what parts of me haven't changed? Now, my purpose hadn't changed. My passion for teaching hadn't changed. My desire to help people grow hadn't changed. It's just the vehicle that changed. But my mission, it stayed the same. And I wonder if that's true for you too. Maybe what's changing isn't who you are. Maybe it's simply the way that you're expressing your gifts. Now, that reminds me of one of the most remarkable transformations in nature. Right? We've all admired butterflies. It's one of the most recognizable symbols of change. But most people don't realize what actually happens inside the chrysalis. It isn't peaceful, it isn't graceful, and it certainly ain't easy. Inside that tiny cocoon, the caterpillar doesn't just simply grow wings. Much of its body actually breaks down before the butterfly can emerge. Now, if you could look inside during that process, it might appear that everything was falling apart. But it isn't falling apart. It's just becoming something new. Now, I think that is a beautiful metaphor for many of the transitions we experience in life. Sometimes before we can become who we're meant to be, the version of ourselves that we've known has to loosen its grip. And that process can feel confusing, messy, even painful. But that doesn't mean something's gone wrong. It may simply mean transformation is taking place. So if change is supposed to feel uncomfortable, and if difficult emotions are actually a normal part of that transformation, what are we supposed to do with those emotions? Should we push them away? Should we ignore them? Or is there a healthier way to move through them? Let's talk about that next. All right, so now we're understanding something important. Change is uncomfortable because our brains crave certainty. We've also learned that many of our greatest struggles don't come from the facts themselves, they come from the stories that we attach to those facts. But there's still one important question. What do we actually do with all of these emotions? Because it's one thing to understand fear, it's another thing to experience it. It's one thing to understand grief. It's another thing to wake up every morning carrying it with you. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about emotional well-being is that emotionally healthy people don't experience difficult emotions. See, nothing could be further from the truth. Emotionally healthy people don't avoid their emotions. They learn how to experience them without becoming controlled by them. All right, so think about it this way. Imagine you're sailing across the ocean. You don't control the wind, you don't control the waves, you don't control when the storms arrive. The only thing you truly control is how you adjust your sails. And life works exactly the same way. There will always be circumstances you didn't choose, unexpected losses, disappointments, moments when life changes direction without asking your permission. But we spend so much energy trying to control the wind when our real job is learning to sail. That's resilience. Not by pretending the storm didn't exist, not by forcing yourself to stay positive, not stuffing your emotions down and hoping they'll disappear. Real resilience is acknowledging the storm, adjusting your sails, and continuing to move forward anyway. Now, one of the things I encourage my coaching clients to do is to stop asking, how do I stop this feeling? And instead ask, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Because emotions aren't your enemy. They're information. Fear might be telling you, this matters to me. Grief might be telling you, I've lost something meaningful. Sadness might be telling you, I need time to heal. Even anxiety can sometimes remind us that we're stepping into unfamiliar territory. See, the emotion itself isn't the problem. The problem is when we allow that emotion to become the captain of our lives. And I often tell people your emotions deserve a seat on the boat, they just don't belong at the helm. Fear can come along for the ride. Grief can come along. Uncertainty can come along. They just don't get to decide where you're going. You do. And that's one of the greatest lessons mindfulness has taught me over the years. Mindfulness isn't about making uncomfortable emotions disappear. It's about learning to observe them and to observe them without immediately reacting to them. To notice things like, I'm feeling afraid instead of I am afraid. And there's a subtle difference, but it's an incredibly powerful one. One describes a temporary emotional experience. The other turns that experience into an identity. And as we've talked about throughout this episode, those are two very different things. All right, so as we begin wrapping up for today, I'd like to share one final thought that I shared with my client. Whenever we're facing an uncertain future, our minds naturally focus on everything we don't know. We wonder, what if I can't do this? What if I make the wrong decisions? What if things don't work out? Fear has a remarkable way of convincing us that we've never faced uncertainty before. But that's rarely true. One of the most effective ways to quiet fear is to stop looking only at what's in front of you and start looking at what's behind you. Not to live in the past, but to learn from it. Right? So think about your own life for a moment. Chances are this isn't the first major transition you've experienced. Maybe you've changed careers, moved to a new city, raised children, started over after a setback, recovered from an illness, learned a completely new skill, walked through heartbreak, or faced a challenge that once seemed impossible. Now, at the time, you probably wondered how you were ever going to get through it. Yet here you are. Now, just think about that. You are living proof that you have survived 100% of your most difficult days. Now, that doesn't mean every day was easy. It doesn't mean you always knew what to do. It doesn't mean that you never felt afraid. It just means you found a way forward. And that's important to remember because fear tends to erase our history. It whispers, you've never done anything like this before. But experience answers back, well, maybe it's not the exact same thing, but I've faced uncertainty before. I've adapted before, I've learned before, I've grown before. Now, one of the things I often tell people is this: your past is more than a collection of memories. It's evidence. Evidence that you're stronger than you sometimes give yourself credit for. Evidence that you've solved problems, that you've built relationships, that you've learned new skills, recovered from disappointments, and reinvented yourself more than once. In other words, your past leaves clues about your future. Or, as I like to think about it, it leaves receipts. Receipts that remind you of what you're capable of. So when fear starts telling you that you can't handle what's next, go back and review the evidence. Not the evidence of everything that went wrong, the evidence of everything you've already overcome. Because here's what I've learned. The chapter may be changing. Your job title may be changing. Your address may change. Your daily routine may change. But your character, your resilience, your wisdom, your compassion, your perseverance, they come along with you. They're portable. No life transition can take those away. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all, sometimes we become so focused on what we're leaving behind that we forget to recognize everything that we're still bringing with us. Hey there, feeling stuck? Spinning your wheels? Are you ready for a breakthrough? Well, then you need to hear this because I've got something that will supercharge your growth this year, and it's called The Mindset Makeover. Now, it's my new book and course that are designed to help you upgrade the mental software that drives your success. And inside, you're going to discover the mindsets that shape every decision, every habit, and every result. And you'll learn the science-backed tools to rewire your thinking for clarity, confidence, and unstoppable momentum. So whether you're aiming higher, trying to break free from old patterns, or finally stepping into that version of yourself that you know that you're capable of becoming, well, this is your launch pad. So don't wait. Head over to josejohnson.com/mindset to grab the book, join the course, or get both together. Again, that's josejohnson.com/mindset. And remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. And with the mindset makeover, you can make it something extraordinary. So let me leave you with a challenge. Not because I want to give you one more thing to add to your to-do list, but because understanding something and applying it are two very different things. So this week, I'd like you to spend 10 or 15 quiet minutes reflecting on 3 simple questions. And you may want to write them down in a journal or the Notes app on your phone. The first question is, what chapter of my life is coming to an end? Maybe it's a career, a relationship, a role, a habit, a dream that no longer serves you. Or maybe it's simply an old version of yourself that you've outgrown. And the second question is, what story have I been telling myself about that ending? Remember, facts describe events. Stories shape identity. So be honest with yourself. Have you been confusing one with the other? And finally, ask yourself, what strengths, values, and experiences am I carrying into my next chapter? Now, think about everything you've already overcome, everything that you've learned, every obstacle you've navigated, every lesson that you've earned. Because while your circumstances may be changing, your character comes with you, your resilience comes with you, your wisdom comes with you. Don't underestimate everything you're bringing into the next season of your life. Sometimes the greatest source of confidence is remembering who you've already become. All right, so today we talked about something every one of us will experience sooner or later, change. Not the kind we choose, because that's easy, but the kind that asks us to leave something meaningful behind. We learned that grief isn't reserved for death. It's a natural response to any meaningful ending. We explored why our brains resist uncertainty, why it's so important to separate the facts from the stories that we tell ourselves, and why resilience isn't about avoiding difficult emotions. It's about learning to navigate them. And I hope that this one idea stays with you long after this episode's over. Do not mistake the pain of transition for proof that you're on the wrong path. Because sometimes the discomfort that you're feeling isn't evidence that you're losing yourself. It's evidence that you're growing into someone new. Think back to that butterfly. From the outside, we admire the beauty of its wings. But inside the chrysalis, transformation is messy. There are moments when it appears that everything's falling apart. Yet in reality, everything is actually coming together in a brand new way. And that's the way life works. Some seasons ask us to build. Others ask us to let go. And some seasons ask us to trust that although we can't see what's ahead, something beautiful is taking shape beneath the surface. I'd also encourage you to remember the sailboat. We don't get to choose every storm. We don't control the direction of the wind, and we can't stop the waves from coming. But every single day, we get to adjust our sails. And sometimes that's enough. All right, if today's episode resonated with you, I'd encourage you to share it with someone who's navigating a major life transition. You never know who may need the reminder that what they're feeling isn't weakness. It's just part of being human. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd also appreciate it if you leave a rating or review. It helps more people discover the show and become part of our growing personal mastery and growth community. And if you'd like to continue exploring today's topic, be sure to visit the Mindset Lab on Substack. This week's companion article goes deeper into the psychology of life transitions, and you'll also find this week's challenge, guided reflection questions, and practical exercises designed to help you navigate change with greater confidence and clarity. Until next time, remember life isn't about holding on to every chapter forever. It's about having the courage to turn the page when it's time, and trusting that everything you've learned along the way is preparing you for the story that's still being written. Because it is what it is. but it becomes what you make it. So make it great. Thanks for tuning in. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice or treatment. While the content of this podcast is based on research and personal experience, everyone's situation is unique, and the advice given may not be applicable to all. Always consult a qualified professional before making significant changes in your life. The Personal Mastery and Growth podcast is recorded at the So Good Media Studios located in the Candy Factory, a co-working space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.